This is the story of two ducks who both experience separate paradigm shifts which lead them outside of a normal duck way of thinking mindset to an expanded mental capacity which ultimately results in idealism. Two ducks walk into a bar. Heavy smoke, purple velvet curtains, wooden tables, and everyone has their own opinion. And they guard them like naive parents guard their children. The younger duck has a green neck while the other is marbled brown and white. They never talk about this to each other, though. They only talk of Jim Capelli and how he's a good-for-nothing reality-shirking, fence-sitting excuse for a member of the Anatidae or duck family. Good ducks don't talk of the middle ground, they just walk around it. Scanning the room suspiciously, the two ducks settle at their chosen perch. As they sit their soft, feathery behinds onto the opposingly robust, polished chairs, their conversation once again turns to Jimmy Capelli and his strange ways.
Jimmy's been talking about burning it all down again. He wants the pond gone.
He stares long and hard at Marble Duck, his gaze intently seeking verbal confirmation of his previous statement. Marble Duck, as far as ducks go, is getting kinda old though, and sometimes you can see the raw nothing of the cosmos firing behind his drooping eyes, and then, you just have to give him a moment.
He says that the pond is secretly trying to oppress us all, that it has nothing but profit in mind, and it pretends to care, but really it forgets your bill the moment you're not there, giving it money or shit. I always say, how can a pond be all that?
He nods knowingly at Marble Duck while pretend smoking a toothpick. Sometimes when Marble Duck would become especially irate and excited, his eyes would roll into the back of his head, exposing just the whites like in a religious ceremony. This was happening now as he continued on.
For 5 years we have put up with Jimmy's shit at the pond. Back then you were just a duckling and I was already what could be considered as old. 5 years now and nothing has changed except for his daily good vibe bullshit.
Greenneck was trying not to smile. He loved it when Marble Duck was inspired. He wasn't usually the type to complain about others, but this was easy and compelling conversation. And it was truly difficult for ducks to be compelled, at the pond or anywhere else. Not much time for excitement when you are a duck.
But this year something has changed.
Marble Duck continued loudly.
This year I have had an idea too.
Greenneck's eyes began to glaze over.
I have a plan, you see. If this works, maybe Capelli won't be bothering us so long after all.
Greenneck was now, unbeknownst to him, also in full trance mode. Maybe it was going your whole life just looking at the same stick and leaves and rocks and banks and occasionally pub, and then all of a sudden being presented something as nuanced and dynamic as an idea that did it. It was like he had been teleported into another dimension, a place he had never been before. His core trembled in a carnal manner as he gazed at Marble Duck's drooling bill, wanting nothing more than to hear the conclusion to this so-called plan. Marble Duck now lowered his head and began speaking in a more conspiratorially appropriate manner.
Every morning that sumo for bitch suns himself on the rocks that face east of the pond, the ones by the reeds. Every morning he warms up his feathers with the first light, smug little fuck. There's a grate there with a tunnel. It's dark, and if you wait there in the night, he will sit right next to you without even knowing. Then when he's thinking up his next bright idea for the day, wham! Stick him one.
His eyes had now rolled back to normal, and he was proudly smirking at Greenneck. He knew full well that he had just blown his mind. For Marble Duck too, it had been a huge revelation. The violent visions had come thick and fast only nights earlier, and he had woken up a changed duck. 10 years on this earth, and he had never experienced nothing that could even compare. It then took him a few days before he could work up the confidence to even share what he had seen or felt that night with his co-conspirator. Greenneck, meanwhile, was furiously trying to think of something to say, something that would be appropriate given that his whole concept of the world and its possibilities had just been changed. It was like the clouds had parted and there was a choir somewhere. Infinite vision, zero understanding. His thoughts gave him nothing concrete, so he reached into another familiar barrel.
Jacques Cousteau,
Marble Duck immediately frowned. It seemed that at one point in his life, Green Neck had been either kicked in the head or struck by lightning, leading to a condition causing him to falsely link causation of just about anything to Jacques Cousteau.
Not this shit again.
Barked Marble Duck.
Always with the Jacques Cousteau.
He now looked almost completely disinterested again. Green Neck, seeing this, frantically tried to float his sinking point.
No, you see, it means we cannot fail. Do you think Jacques Cousteau would have been enchanted by the dive had it not been for him staring at our ancestors in a pond somewhere when he was a boy? No. No ducks, no Cousteau. There's more to ducks than people like to think.
In the long, awkward pause that followed, he looked hopefully at Marble Duck. Maybe that was enough to draw him back in.
You're a fucking idiot,
he replied plainly.
But maybe there's a job in there for you after all.
At this point, the bartender enters their field of vision. A burly man with burly eyebrows, so thick you cannot read his face, and a black handlebar mustache.
All right, you two gonna order something or not?
He is abrupt. Unfortunately, he knew these two cheapskates well. He had dealt with them on many occasions.
You know the deal, order something or fuck off.
The ducks scowl back at him, both mean mugging and Greenneck still puffing on his imaginary cigaretto. The pissing contest begins.
Do you have any grapes? Whack!
The bartender punts him into the wall with brutal speed. His fury ramped up quickly. This establishment was a shelter for short fuses.
I told you before what I think of your jokes. Now get the fuck out of my bar. Maybe just a pint with 2 straws.
The pissing contest ends. The barman rolls his eyes, cursing as he turns his back and walks to the bar to pour them their drink. The pair continue to sip their one beer long into the night, goading each other on with more defamatory tales regarding old Jimmy Capelli. When the bartender finally kicks them out, everyone else has already left and they are blackout drunk. Doesn't take that much when you only weigh about a kilo. They waddle all the way back through the park, arguing loudly about Capelli, their plans and duck sports, all the way to the pond, the scene of their future ambition. Slowly, everything wakes up as the light rouses all from the night. Starting quiet and slow but multiplying into a crescendo, an unruly band of critters. The worms wrestle the still wet black soil as reptiles scuttle and birds shriek their morning endorsement, banishing the last of the night creatures into their cracks and nooks and wet caves. The rocks by the reeds, that's where the sun always hits first. And Jimmy Capelli, like any other morning, was already waiting by the water's edge, patiently perched. He rarely ever had to contend with ducks or other pond folk here in the mornings. It seemed their interests, as usual, lay elsewhere. The birds had already made their first kills and were frantically feeding their young and repairing damaged nests. The beetles and critters below on high alert, knowing full well each morning brought death from above. Jimmy blinks his beady black eyes rapidly, allowing them to adjust to the light, thinking of nothing. Occasionally, tired flies that had been up all night but decided this was their last dance would meander lazily around his perch, and occasionally he would snap one up, taking it slow. He had a certain disdain for urgency. He found it unhelpful. Jimmy, too, had been subject to visions. A few years ago now, but he had also woken up a changed duck. Previous this dream, Jimmy Capelli had made excuses often, but now the universe had swirled around him and engulfed his tiny duck heart. That day, he had awoken to see an egg in the sky that contained his future. Clear blue morning, Glockenspiel glissando. And he couldn't really explain how and why, but he understood. And he went about living his life slowly and with care, observing intently all that pond folk that made him whole. Feather by feather, his wings creak quietly with all that the day brings. And unbeknownst to him, a murderer waits tired, wet, and hungover in the shadows. In the dark of the drain behind a heavy rusted metal gate left ajar. He clenches his blade like a lunatic. Bloodshot eyes exploded like his mind the night before. The old duck had given him the knife while pretending to note down his last wishes regarding his wife and kids in case of a tragedy. As Greenneck stood there in the wet, dark tunnel, he wondered how things could ever be different. Was there ever a world that didn't bring him here? It was like someone had strapped him onto a dolly and onto a rail. It felt like when a roller coaster takes a turn at high speed and the G-force pushes you deep into the back of your seat. He could see the world around him, but there was no getting off. Even if he had really wanted to throw that knife down and waddle on out of there, he felt quite certain that that was never physically possible. The pond could only be a better place without Jimmy Capelli. They would all thank him soon enough. He never even knew anything else. Back by the rocks, Jimmy's mind too was in a strange place. Stoned on the morning, completely departed somewhere between space and time in a cloud palace. The assassination was not what you could call sophisticated. Charged with delirium, Green Neck barrels from out the tunnel and past the gate. In the 7 steps it takes him to cross the gap to Capelli, he stumbles twice. Capelli, roused by the noise, turns to see the commotion, only to be face to face with a psychotic, cross-eyed Green Neck, foaming at the bill and thrusting a knife violently into his backside below the left wing. Deep dark pond and an upside-down moon. In Jimmy's mind, he is doing furious battle. Everything flexing at the extreme, muscles bulging, eyes shut. But in reality, it was over before it began. Green Neck is tied to the hilt. As Green Neck grasps the handle with a mighty dedication, a fissure is torn right into his mind's eye. He sees shadows in the fog, and the victim's body becomes heavy as he guides it down to the stony banks of the pond. And everything is electrically brought back to reality. He tosses his knife into the water and looks about anxiously. It was all off. It was as if someone had suddenly poured molten hot steel through both of his ears, and it was now sloshing around violently with his thoughts. He was doused in unfamiliar fear. Things had never felt so wrong. He was confused because he thought he had done everything right, even if it was wrong. This was about order. This was about respect. He had done all the old duck had asked of him. He had always listened to his elders. As he hastily fled the scene of the crime, his mind ran wild and scared. He would never admit it, but at that point, he wanted his mum. She was gone, though, and anyways, she could have in no way ever truly understood what he really needed in that moment. One could say that, as his tiny orange flippers slapped hastily across the vast expanse of the sinking wet soil of Pond Island, making his way to the jetty on the far side where Marble Duck lived by the buoy, that he was like a small rowboat miles out to sea in a terrible storm. His capacities could never contain the situation at hand. Nothing would ever be whole again. Push, push, push. 2 circles right, 3 circles left, and 1 more to the right. Marble Duck's feathery behind glides effortlessly through the water, and around his little buoy. He squawks at the dragonflies with his eyes closed, asserting his make-believe dominance in the morning sun, tremendously hungover, but ready to do it all again. He doesn't remember much from the night before, stupidly self-content. Ever since he had that dream nights earlier, he knew that he was boss of the jetty. Ducks don't dream, he would show them all the way. The only way the pond would ever be cured of its indecision was to bring back order. He felt certain that he needed to dissolve all disobedience, and this had to begin with Jimmy Capelli. Liquidate the fool. He couldn't wait to bring some of his buddies in on this. He kept excitedly paddling around his buoy, focusing all of his might and concentration on the demise of Jimmy Capelli. Little did he know, though, that the combination of his newfound inspiration and idealism had found nothing but coldness and anger inside his duck gut, and it was now all swirling and quickly forming a terrible cancer in his bowels. He ignored the knot in his stomach as he continued to paddle around his keep, letting out a belligerent quack every full rotation. There was only one thing Marble Duck thought he still needed, a patsy. Blissfully ignorant to the plan already in motion, he thought of the duck he had in mind, and allowed himself a smile. After all, what's the use in being a hero if you're not around to enjoy it afterwards? As if on command, from the shoreline there came a rapid commotion, from just behind the trees by the water. At first, Marble Duck just stared, perplexed. Then Green Neck's frenzied face exploded out from the undergrowth, glancing about briefly before bloodshot eyes fall directly on Marble Duck. He's crying and heading straight for him. Marble Duck, still not connecting the dots, was now already pissed off. Real men really don't exist no more, he thought. He hoped the boys weren't around to see. Good ducks should keep that shit to themselves.
Get a grip, Green Neck, you're making a scene.
He quickly flaps to the shore to meet Green Neck, and like a real duck he slaps him on the head, repetitively, trying desperately to silence the manic duck like someone trying to snooze an old-school alarm clock.
What the hell, Marble Duck? Stop it!
They wrestle violently on the rocks and in the mud. Marble Duck manages to sneak in a handful of feathers from the back of Green Neck's head, and using his old duck strength, slams his face violently against a nearby stone. The blood spreads through the soil and Green Neck is silent now.
I didn't mean for it to go this far.
He throws the old duck to the side and there are tears in his eyes. What a sight. Marble Duck's already internal penis receded further into his body. If he hadn't have been so uncomfortable with the situation, he would have probably had time to ponder why Green Neck was acting like this in the first place. He was usually a tough duck. He could drink the beer, and he was straight down the line. No funny business. And now this? There was now a small crowd starting to arrange itself discreetly around the jetty. They all pretended to not be listening, but really their attention was like a tractor beam from the corner of their eye and with invisible ears. This kind of turmoil went down from time to time, animals sorting out their egos. But this had a different feel to it. The morning air was charged, and although the pond folk were all pretending to do their own pond folk things, every focus was on the drama unfolding amongst them. Green Neck's charge had been stifled by the impact of his face to the rock, and he was sitting on his ass, legs splayed out in front of him, quiet now, with big tears welling up in his wide open eyes that looked up at Marble Duck. When he finally spoke, his words were full of accusation.
I cut him loose and they cut me. There is a chasm now on my brow, and all that searches out darkness flows deep into it for shelter.
As he spoke these words, he felt Jimmy Capelli standing inside him, just behind his skin, talking with him or for him, and it was like when you can't swallow from guilt. The previous night's happenings were now finally starting to come back to Marble Duck, the mission he had tasked his friend with. The drunken confidence and excitement with which they had hatched their scheme was now a cruel, faint memory as the reality of the situation set in. All that was left was an area of misunderstanding too large to address. Better to just never admit nothing. Marble Duck looked down at Green Neck with disdain and pretended to not know what he was talking about. With all ears and eyes surrounding him, he could not incriminate himself. They would not understand what he thought he knew. And by the looks of it, things had not turned out in glory as the visions had foreshadowed anyways. Instead, he turned his back on his plans and on his co-conspirator, like cowards usually do, looking away when that was the easiest way out. The crowd now gathering around the altercation was finding it harder and harder to eavesdrop in a considerate manner. Many had forgotten their shyness and were eyeballing the two blatantly. Marble Duck was becoming mad. This had to end immediately.
I got no idea what this duck on about.
He exclaimed loudly as he walked away from the mess that was Green Neck, addressing more the crowd than the duck himself. And just like that, their friendship died forever. Years spent getting drunk and talking shit instantly swallowed like Capelli in the pond. As Green Neck watched Marble Duck cart his old ass pompously back out to the water, only to resume his neurotic schedule of rotating endlessly around a jetty stump while cultivating bowel cancer, he realized that he would like nothing better than to break every bone in that old coot's face in front of all the pond folk here. He tried no such thing, he just sat there in the mud, with the rock of Jimmy in his throat and a brass section so loud it could crack concrete, playing in his head and only to him, as the spectators of the fight listened to nothing but the last crickets insensitive enough to not read the situation. Second by second, he too felt the increasing urgency to leave. He had zeroed back in on the situation, and whereas before he was furiously ignorant in his mania to the growing amounts of eyes on him, it had now become painfully obvious. The judgment of his neighbors was terrible, but he could not blame them as he must have looked truly out of his mind. Green Neck knew he had to leave, but it wasn't for fear of detainment, but rather for the indulgence of a primal need that now resided in him. Really, it had more to do with shame and confusion. So when Green Neck jumped up and without a further look at his audience, turned his back and ran with a terrible speed into the dark of the forest, it wasn't so much because he was worried about someone making him pay for his indiscretions, but rather because his own self had turned on him and was now kicking over every shelf in his being and making sure that all the delicate and fragile knickknacks that had somehow not broken from the fall to the ground were meticulously smashed into dust with a great mallet. It's hard to say in words at all what really took a hold of him after that morning, but all he knew now was that feeling of having a pile of shit so big to fix you don't even know where to start. While his conscious self stared stunned at that pile, not knowing where to begin, his unconscious mind continued on into the forest of the island, looking for anything left standing to smash. The rest of that day, Green Neck embarked on a spree of sorts. Everything that meant anything to him had to go. And it was, like many things, quite out of his control. A part of him that he did not have access to was now behind the wheel. First, he went to his so-called place of work, screaming incoherently at the colleagues with whom he had for so long tried to maintain decorum. He pulled out his dick and made sure that any tuppence of respect that they might have left for him was now an eerie reminder of how easy it was to misjudge a person. When he left the office, the whole room was stunned silent, not daring to say a word in fear of adding fuel to a fire that was already burning out of control. Like a comet in its final moments. The next stop was the pub. Realizing he had no money to drown his sorrows on arrival, he throws himself at the feet of every patron, desperately begging for enough capital to score a drink. He tells them he will do anything, that he will jerk them all off in the bathroom, and they look at him in disgust, thinking he is a desperate crackhead. The bartender, the only one to finally get his satisfaction, throws the crying duck out to the curb. As he sits there in a piss puddle outside the entrance and the patrons gathered around the door to follow his crying mess, he tells them all to take a picture. And they do. And it still hangs in that pub today. The last stop would be his own home. His wife was already anxiously awaiting his return, having heard rumors of this morning's drama. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but there was love, and she only wanted to help. He stormed into the home, really just a dense section of reeds by the banks of the pond, called his wife a cunt, and concluded loudly that he would never return because he never really had love for her in the first place. Then he blamed the kids to their faces, saying that if it wasn't for them, none of this would have happened in the first place. As he storms out into the night, he kicks his pet for good measure. Whatever reputation he once had now truly lies in tatters. And it wasn't like he really meant any of it. The duck computer in his brain just broke under the strain of his obligation, and everyone else bore the brunt. That night, he swam away from the island across the pond and walked deep into the forest on the other side. Eventually getting so lost that he just gave up walking altogether and squatted on a dead log in the moonlight. Very, very slowly, his sanity was starting to return to him. And he knew he had some serious explaining to do, and a lot of apologizing. The idea of an apology was really something new to Green Neck. Prior to this evening, he had never apologized to anyone in his entire life. And although he hated the thought of it and it made his stomach turn, something deep inside him knew that it was the right thing to do. He did not know it, but the only thing that even brought out this sparkle was the fact that there was now a piece of Jimmy Capelli inside of him. Not a physical part of him, but an abstract part. It was more like the idea of him. He had moved from his throat and was now jovially, almost mocking, dancing a jig on the inside of his taint. When he felt the morning approaching, he decided it was time for him to find his way home to face the music. Every bit of him wanted to stay in that forest forever and just sharpen sticks and forget his language and himself. But there was something else there now. Whatever amusement park ride he had been strapped to, it was clearly ignoring any of his pleading for stops or changes in direction. Again, he felt more like he was strapped to some kind of determined rail, rather than having much say in the matter. The sun had been up for a good hour when Green Neck finally found his way back to the edge of the forest at the pond. He stood there by the trees, making his final futile considerations on aborting his apology and becoming a feral bush duck. As he stared at the island and the jetty across the grass, however, he knew that this was the only place for him. He had messed up just about as bad as anyone can mess up, hurting those who he loved most, the worst. Waiting there in the morning sun, he wondered whether Jacques Cousteau ever had to apologize to all the people he knew for some kind of unthinkable act he was a part of. Who could know? That would be the last thought Green Neck would ever have thunk, though, for at that moment, while he was enjoying the final minute of divorce from his consequence, death came for him too. He was sleepy in the warm morning sun, and from walking all night, so he never heard the vicious little inbred fluff ball as it bounded away from the path and its owner towards him, now quite exposed in the open grass. He went straight for the kill. Clear blue ocean, and a great big parrot. The life drains quickly out of Green Neck as he is carried away by the dog, his throat held firmly in its jaw, and everything that he was fractures out. Upon delivering the dead prize to its owner, the dog is saddened to receive no praise. Instead, he is chastised for being grotty, and Green Neck's dead body is disposed of in the nearest wheelie bin. And just like that, the only thing left of him is whatever idea anybody else had.